The Happy Warrior Podcast, conservative commentary on the news of the day from a more positive perspective.
Hey everyone, I'm Happy Warrior Pete. This is the Happy Warrior Podcast. It is good to be here with you. Stuff has been going on. My eyes have not been functioning, so I haven't been able to get hardly any work done. But I was lucky enough to have this interview with author Blake J. Harris. He is the man that wrote Console Wars, which is a fantastic book back in 2014. And now he just recently came out with The History of the Future, which is about Palmer J. Luckey, this 19-year-old whiz kid that resurrects the virtual reality. He's the guy that created Oculus Rift, which got bought by Facebook. And then during the 2016 election, Facebook kicks Palmer Luckey out because Luckey is a Trump supporter. And it's just a gigantic mess. Anyhow, Harris is one of the few people that has got this story right. He worked on this story for 3.5 years. It is an amazing book. It is amazing even if you're just interested in video games and nerd and tech culture. But if you're also in free speech and what's going on in Silicon Valley and politics, this is also a good book for you. So in both those ways, I highly recommend that you check out this interview. Thank you so much to Blake J. Harris for the interview. Check out his book, History of the Future, and help pump that thing to #1. You guys are great. Thanks for watching.
Hey, how are you?
Good. Hey, how are you, sir?
I'm good. You want to do video or just audio?
Yeah, is it okay if we do video?
Yes.
All right. Well, welcome. Just a quick intro for anyone that's watched and hasn't seen my stuff before. This is the Happy Warrior Podcast. I'm a conservative journalist. I like to talk about issues dealing with freedom of speech, what's going on in Silicon Valley, things that seem more important to me than maybe other issues. I am blessed to have the amazing, and I just finished his book, an audiobook and physical version, which is The History of the Future, Mr. Blake J. Harris. And it's really good. He's really kind to do this interview with me. Sometimes I feel like the dog chasing the car. You're not exactly sure what you're supposed to do when you catch it. Anyhow, quick, besides this, he has a very popular book that I read several years ago, Console Wars, which was about mostly the 90s, the war between Nintendo and Sega. And that is a fabulous book. And it's not a political one at all. I highly recommend it. But this newest book, so I think I'll let you start. So,
sure.
Okay, so let's do this. How did you decide on your next project after you had finished Console Wars?
Sure. So I'll give you some background even before that. But so once upon a time, like 10 years ago, not that long ago, my day job was trading commodities for a living. I worked with 7 Brazilians and 1 American who lived in Brazil, and I basically traded sugar and coffee and soybeans for Brazilian clients, and that was what I did from 6:30 a.m. to 2 p.m., and then I went off and tried to make it as a writer. And then I did that from age 22 to age 30. So for me, every day now, getting to write full time is like a blessing. That's why, when I got a message from you, such an enthusiastic, nice message, I'm always happy to make time for anyone who wants to talk about my work, because I'm just so grateful that I get to do it for a living. And so I wrote that book, Console Wars. I quit my job the day I turned 30. I wrote Console Wars. It came out in 2014. And then getting specifically to your question, I remember that when Console Wars came out, or right around the time it came out, I remember being right here in this kitchen talking to my literary manager and saying that it was really sad. Let's take this off. It was really sad I was never going to write a book as good as Console Wars. And he said, no, you'll keep getting better as a writer. And I said, yeah, I hope so. But I just don't think I'm ever going to find a book that has such interesting characters, such an interesting story, intersection of culture, pop culture, technology, entertainment, and all this stuff. And it remains to be seen whether this book will do as well as that, or where it will stand in the annals of time. But anyway, I struggled to find another topic because I put 3 years into Console Wars. It was becoming increasingly clear to me that I'm the sort of storyteller that is not going to churn something out. I'm going to pick a topic that I can spend a few years on. And probably I wanted to do something related to gaming, since that's a space that I had become familiar with and fascinated by. And I remember actually the way I got into this specific topic was, so for me, writing console wars was life-changing. I got to write for a living. I got to actually be on the other side of interviews, and people were interviewing me. And so the first time I was interviewed was for Popular Mechanics, and there was an issue coming out in May of 2014, the same month my book came out. And I remember it was Mother's Day, the day the issue was coming out. I was with my mom and my grandma, my aunt and uncle, and everyone. And midway through this brunch, I went to go get a copy of Popular Mechanics. This was like a big moment in the Harris family. But midway, it was my mom was very excited. But I didn't bring it back immediately because I was so fascinated by the cover story, the one that had nothing to do with me, which was about this, then he was 22-year-old kid, Palmer Luckey, who had founded Oculus, the virtual reality company, sold it to Facebook, and was trying to start this virtual reality revolution. And that wasn't necessarily the first time I heard of Oculus, but it was the first time that I really thought about Palmer and thought about Oculus in a way that there was this great big story behind it and that maybe I could write about it. And then from there, as you know from reading Console Wars, I like to tell really intimate, character-driven stories, and to do that, it really requires a lot of great access to the people involved so that I can make it so the readers feel like they're in the room and in the minds of these people. And so I was initially introduced to Palmer in, I think, July of 2014, and he said something which I thought was very mature for a 22-year-old young man who had just sold his company for $3 billion, and said, basically, in his opinion, Oculus hadn't accomplished anything yet. Obviously, they had this great big acquisition, but they now had to go from a niche gaming device to a mainstream, I guess he said it was a niche gaming toy to a mainstream electronics device. And I basically said, yeah, that's what I find so interesting right now. And he said that there had been a lot of journalists who had reached out, and he thought that now was not the time. But at the same time, him and a lot of the folks there were fans of Console Wars. So they were at least open to a discussion, and that discussion took a while. I'm a little frustrating, but the long story short is that by February of 2016, I was granted this almost like unlimited access by Facebook and Oculus, and I was the only author given this access. And then, in retrospect, February 2016 was kind of the last moment before things fell apart, because 1 month later they launched their first consumer product. That didn't go so great. There was all sorts of shipping delays and a lot of anger. And then 7 months after that, Palmer Luckey became the most hated man in Silicon Valley for supporting a Donald Trump organization. And then 6 months after that, he was fired for unknown reasons or whatever. And this was all in the middle of my writing the book. So it turned out to be a very interesting book, one that I certainly could not have predicted when it started.
No, it is a very good book. I mean, in many ways, I like it. In many ways, it is very similar to Console Wars. It's almost an extension of that because you're still the same writing style. I love you have these little vignettes of each of the characters, and it's nonfiction, so these are real people and real stories. And I like how you just in Console Wars you talk about two of the founders of Oculus, and one was this guy from Russia, and it was his buddy, and they had started Scale Video or whatever the name of that place is. It was just really well done. I do like your writing style a lot. It's a nice balance in nonfiction. Nonfiction sometimes gets too heavy, but you keep me interested. There was rarely a time where I was like, oh my gosh, this is such a trudge to get through. No, I enjoyed it. It was a good book.
I appreciate that. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I write everything I do with my grandmother in mind, and trying to think, how could I get her to care about Sega or Nintendo or virtual reality or a bad movie for the How This Get Made podcast? Because to me, that's what the best stories do. Moneyball is a great movie that's for people beyond just baseball fans. And The Social Network, which was always a big inspiration of mine for Console Wars. I think that's for more than just a tech thing. Also, I like that you mentioned the backstory of a couple of the founders, these guys who founded Scaleform and essentially partnered with Palmer Luckey to found Oculus. And I do pay. I do spend a lot of time talking about people's backstories when I introduce a character, and I try to reveal more of their backstory over time. But I think a big part of the reason I do it is for the same reason that I felt like basically showing all the stuff that's unrelated to virtual reality was important, because I think that people don't change that much, or at least we all have tendencies. And so the way that Mark Zuckerberg treated Palmer is not an isolated incident, like that's symptomatic of his worldview and ethos and the kind of way he behaves. So whether it was, Brendan or Reeb partnering with Mike Antonoff 20 years ago, or partnering with Palmer Luckey 7 years ago, people have tendencies, and I think there's a lot to be revealed about the future by looking at the past.
Yeah, no, it's an incredible story. So for those who haven't read the book, essentially it's about how virtual reality was resurrected, and the person that largely did it was Palmer Luckey, and that's his last name is Luckey, but there's like an E. It's C-K-E-Y instead of just Y. I love Palmer Luckey. I kind of want to meet Palmer Luckey because he sounds like, like just a normal, one of my nerdy friends. He's into anime. He's into video games. He likes to do modding. I mean, he's like a genius. I mean, he's very talented, but he just seems like someone you could easily get along with. Anyhow, so it's about him, how he made.
I think that, with all due respect to the Dos Equis guy, I think Palmer is the most interesting man in the world. There's parts of him that I don't like, but there's a lot of parts of him that I love and made my job so fascinating. Like I remember I was interviewed by the guy writing a profile about him for CNN, and it sort of crystallized for me. I said, Palmer's the only person I know where, when I'm talking to him, I'm often having 3 conversations at the same time. One could be about plans for upcoming, his opinion of virtual reality upcoming headsets. The other is his opinions about latency and something super technical that I don't fully understand. And then the third thing will be about how the media would react if there really was a Batman in the world. Crazy guys, girls talking, just like fun stuff. And he'll give a very intelligent, practical perspective. He'll take a silly theoretical and give a really fun answer. So that made my job a lot more fun, interviewing him as often as I did over the past few years.
No, he is kind of the hero of this story. It's interesting to me because it's obvious from your book. If you read this book, see, here's the giant twist. See, it's almost 2 books in one, with book 1 is the majority of it, and it's this inspirational story about this kid genius who resurrects what was basically everyone thought a dead platform. And he at 22, he gets a $3 billion contract from Facebook. Sorry, he gets bought out by Facebook, and that is 3/4 of the book. And then there's this other the last part that is like, okay, 2016, the election of Trump. And by the way, my favorite chapter in your book was like chapter 38, 39. No, it was in the early 40s, but it was where you talked about the guy that was in charge of the Donald Reddit, and it made it so successful, and he had a Philippine wife. And I thought in that chapter you get down exactly the environment that Trump, that support that Trump came from. You seem to really get it. And yeah,
I'm so glad you liked that, because that was the hardest chapters to get my editors to publish, because it was the one that had the least to do with virtual reality or even Palmer. It was basically like a profile of a Trump supporter, and this Trump supporter ended up being the top mod at the Donald on Reddit, and I thought it was so important because, especially 2 years ago, I don't know if you've already said it, but you're aware, I'm a lifelong liberal. I actually grew up in Chappaqua, New York, where Hillary Clinton lives. So, I was especially supportive of the Clinton family since they're kind of my neighbors. But so for me, it was a shock that Trump won. And reading liberal media, initially I'm told, the only reason Trump won is because people are stupid, or because, people are racist. But then I realized that's obviously not true. So I want to try to understand, okay, so what was appealing?
Yeah, well, what allowed this crazy thing to happen? Yeah. No, I think most people were surprised.
What'd you say?
I think most people were surprised. Trump supporters too.
Right. No, it's true. But like, I just mean like, I wanted to understand the thinking of somebody who would really support Trump and was feeling as happy as I was sad. And every, profile I read was just such a condescending piece, usually from like the New York Times or whatever, like they're going to a diner in Ohio. And like, I knew that was not, there had to be more to it. And so I initially interviewed the founder of Nimble America, the organization that Palmer donated $10,000 to, which led to him being outed as a Trump supporter and misreported for much worse. But, and as I talked to the guy, I really felt like I got a good sense of a lot of things that I hadn't understood. And while I totally disagreed with him on most of the stuff, he was respectful in his opinions and I was in mine. And so I really wanted to put that chapter in there because at the end of the day, my big takeaway was that we all have so much more in common than the opposite, and that we should just actually do what liberals say we're supposed to do and be tolerant and actually understand other people. They're not out to get us, and vice versa, I would add, because a lot of times conservatives I talk to think liberals are out to get them. But, of course there are, 5 or 10% on the spectrum of both ends that want to destroy the other side and think they're evil. But, 80% of us in the middle actually want to move forward together. And so I thought that was an important chapter, and I'm really glad that you like that one.
I think, in fact, and I hope your book has some grounding and lasts a long time that people can go back to read it, because that will help them explain like what was going on that Trump, how this guy got elected, and it does help in some way explain the reaction. So the last fourth of your book is Palmer Luckey enters into the maw of the beast that was 2016 Silicon Valley. And I don't mean to disparage them, but I mean, there was, I don't want to, it was almost like a moral hysteria, almost. Or it was a very...
It was hysteria. That's the only way to put it. And it first clicked for me when I was interviewing Peter Thiel, or I was talking to him because he couldn't really talk to me. But anyway, I heard him mention the word hysteria, and I just remember being struck that that's what it was, and that's what's so weird to me about this whole thing, because when we read about hysterias in books, whether it's like the Salem witch trials or whatever, there's an understanding afterwards that it was a moment of hysteria. People were acting ridiculous and hysterical, and then we rectify that. But so many people on my side of the aisle have not done that, and instead doubled down on the hysteria, which is the total opposite of what I think we should be doing right now. But it really was a hysteria, and in the same way that like to me, Console Wars is a book about Sega and Nintendo, but it really is like a book about the 90s. It's like a time capsule of 1990 to 1996, and I wanted this book to be the same thing, and I wanted it to capture the hysteria, and hopefully people will read it 10 years from now and go, no way, people read that.
No way that happened.
It's
yeah.
like, no, here's Business Insider, here's Kotaku, here's actually respected outlets showing you exactly how hysterical everyone was acting.
Oh, no, I mean, and there are legitimate criticisms to make about President Trump. I mean, I'm not a MAGA guy. I didn't vote for Trump in 2016. They call a Trump skeptic, I guess. You call hits and strikes. So I understand. I have family that was super pro-MAGA. Someone owns the hat. And I have family that's on the left that it was a terrible thing when President Trump won. So I understand both views of U.S. politics. I think even against the rest of the country, I think Silicon Valley is kind of an outlier. So Palmer Luckey, this kid genius that Mark Zuckerberg and I would guess, how much do you think of that $3 billion contract with Oculus Rift was built in with the thought that they would get control of this whiz kid? I mean, do you think
it's a big part of it? Yeah, I mean, like, we should probably just clarify for listeners, they sold for almost $3 billion. Obviously, Palmer got only a fraction of that. Only a fraction, he's super rich now. He's got hundreds of millions of dollars, but it's not like sometimes people think that he walked away.
Oh yeah. They got all of the three. Yeah, no.
But yeah, no. I mean, like, here's because of even though I turned in the book 2 years late, and it's a very long book, there's still some other things I'm going to be adding to later editions. And one point I thought was important to make that I was not able to get in time was just the thinking of why did the Oculus guys sell to Facebook in the first place? And part of what they told me was that Mark Zuckerberg had said in the past and told them during the the wooing period of trying to acquire them, he didn't acquire companies for companies. He acquired companies for the people, and specifically the founders. And he proudly told them that he had never fired or lost a founder before, meaning mostly like people like from Instagram and WhatsApp. And so that was a big part of the draw, to your question of like how much of the, how important was it to Mark to have Palmer be part of this acquisition? It was a big part of it, not just Palmer, but his other, Brendan Arib was incredibly important too, but making sure to secure all those guys.
Yeah.
And so the fact that they were so willing to toss Palmer aside and saw him no longer as an asset purely because of things that had nothing to do with business or technology is insane to me.
Yeah, no. So for those that read the book, and I remember the Wired article in your book, and I remember reading it, and I had to read it like 4 or 5 times. I was like, what? Because it just didn't make sense. There was a disconnect when I was reading the article somehow, because they're like saying, this guy is to blame for all the mean memes. And it's somehow it was this like kind of hard to follow story where he donated money to a failed Trump's PAC, and it's just a hard story to follow. So his mistake he made was, and I don't know if I called it a mistake, but what got him was that he promised to meet the donations for a PAC that was going to put up billboards that were in the style of crap posting, for lack of a better term. Yeah, and it didn't really go anywhere. And then he got, I want to say, was it the Daily Beast that started this whole kerfuffle?
Yes.
Yeah, the Daily Beast managed to get in contact with Palmer Luckey via Yiannopoulos. And I don't know what... Palmer... Basically, he gave them his identification because it was anonymous for the donations, and getting that, and even sort of promising in the Daily Beast way that, we will keep it off the record, don't you worry. They did that. They did it, and that started everything. So you've talked to Palmer Luckey. You say in your book you frequently are in communications with him. Why did Palmer Luckey, even with his understanding of his interest in journalism, with his he even just took some classes about journalism. He was considering being a video game journalist. Why did he do that? I mean, why did he should have? I am surprised.
I hear you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to backtrack a little bit. So Nimble America is the organization. It was founded, like you said, to put up billboards across the country, and these billboards were going to be like posting or meme related, inspired. At the same time, and I can't make this point clearly enough, the billboards, had to be approved by the billboard companies. So even if you were to imagine the worst case billboards, they wouldn't have been allowed to go up, which is not what they plan to do. But people should have just stopped to think wow, maybe it can't be such bad stuff. But anyway. The organization was founded in early September. On September 17th, I believe, September 17th, 2016, they came on the Donald subreddit to ask for donations. And like you said, Palmer, using a pseudonym, Nimble Richman, offered to match the donations of any that were made. What actually happened that day was that people initially said, there's no wealthy backer of this organization. There's no Nimble Rich Man. So Nimble America asked Milo Yiannopoulos, who had no involvement in the organization, but could sort of act as a broker to meet the wealthy person, Palmer, and say, yes, he exists. So Milo did that. Regardless, it was very unpopular on the Donald. The organization essentially folded after putting up one billboard in Pittsburgh, which just said, too big to jail, and had a caricature of Hillary Clinton's face. So, nothing crazy there. But anyway, what happened was a few days later, a writer from the Daily Beast named Gideon Resnick, he was looking into the story. he had written a story a month or so earlier about Milo Yiannopoulos' privilege grant and how it was bogus. I have no idea whether it was bogus or not. That's irrelevant to the story, but it seemed that he was looking to probably write another piece that, Nimble America was bogus, there was no wealthy backer, and that this was another cash grab by Milo. Milo told this writer he had nothing to do with this organization except for being the guy who verified there was a wealthy person behind it. I should also mention that given Milo's reputation and his, lack of honesty, I did interview Milo, but most of what I have in the book is based on emails, which actually did match with what he said. But I wasn't just taking Milo's word for it here. And in terms of your question of why would Palmer agree to speak to the guy from the Daily Beast, it was because this guy from the Daily Beast seemed likely to write a negative piece about Milo. So Palmer calculated that if the no arrangement was made, Milo would probably give his name away anyway.
Oh, that I wouldn't. There is some truth to that. I know Milo. I'm not a Milo Yiannopoulos fan. He is definitely a contentious individual for many reasons I don't need to go into right now. I could see that as a possibility. So he was thinking this stuff is more about Milo anyways, and I want to keep Milo happy, and so whatever. I feel really bad for Palmer because after this, I mean, holy cow! Let's talk about the reaction specifically at Facebook and Silicon Valley to this whole scandal, I guess.
Well, that's the other thing too. To answer your question, is like Palmer, I'm sure, calculated there was some percentage that the Daily Beast writer would break his trust and not keep his name off the record. But he also probably assumed it wouldn't be awful. I remember talking to him, and he thought that the reaction was going to be, at worst, similar to what Peter Thiel had experienced when he came out as a Trump supporter at the RNC. Where you're kind of despised by Silicon Valley, but you didn't really do anything wrong, and there's, it's just like, oh, we don't like this guy. That was not what happened. What you said earlier is what happened, where Palmer was somehow believed to be responsible for every terrible meme that you had seen during the election season, which, like, two things I would say as we get into the reaction. It's like, one, I remember reading the Daily Beast article because a lot of people texted it to me the night it happened, and I knew that Palmer was a Trump supporter. I did not know that he had donated to this organization, but I tried to think about what I was reading outside of my perspective, just as like my grandma, like the average person. And the two things I thought were, one, if he's responsible for so many terrible memes, what are the memes? Let me see them.
Yeah, show me the evidence.
Yeah, then I would be like, okay, yeah, Palmer, this is really stupid. Why would you get involved with this? This is terrible stuff that you're helping spread. And then the other thing, too, was that this organization was 5 days old, and I just was like, well, what? I don't understand. They have, maybe, the allegations, maybe they're going to do bad things, but that wasn't what was written. And then I guess the third thing was, the article, I mean, it's pretty typical headline writing, that he put his billions towards this. He doesn't have billions, but also, he only donated $10,000, which is a lot of money, but still. But my question was, who's he paying? People make memes for free. What is this thing that's happening here? So anyway, but that was, in talking about the reaction. So the actual headline that came out at 6 p.m. Pacific on September 22nd, 6 weeks or so before the election, was Facebook billionaire secretly funding Trump's meme machine. And then that, inaccurate, let's say the most charitable way, inaccurate title, within a matter of hours was covered by other outlets, and it became the Facebook billionaire secretly funding Trump's racist meme machine, Trump's misogynistic meme machine. This game of telephone got on, and then there was people on social media. I mentioned one influencer in there, a guy named Anil Dash, who specifically says that Palmer is the reason that there's all these white supremacist and terrible memes online. I don't know where he I don't know what his basis for that was, but I emailed him about it to ask where he was coming from. He still stands by his opinion, even though I've spent years researching this, and he read a story that didn't even say that. But regardless, he has 500,000 followers. He's written for important, tech journals before. So, his tweet was often referred to. And then just hour by hour, it became this awful, awful thing. It got worse and worse. And everyone was just linking back to the previous piece. No, there was not. I still just kept wondering, where is the evidence? What is happening here? And to me, it sort of culminated with the story from Wired, which is a magazine that I've always loved and thought pretty highly of. And they just had an article called "Palmer Luckey's the Worst," but he doesn't represent Silicon Valley, which is like, I don't know. I mean, that doesn't seem like a headline from a reputable outlet to me. But then getting to your other question, the reaction at Facebook was everything that I saw on social media of people freaking out and, wanting him to be fired and thinking that he was a white supremacist or worse. That was what people at Facebook thought, or, the average person at Facebook. And then obviously there was a whole other part of the story with Palmer and a statement and dealing with Facebook leadership. But there was hysteria. I've never seen so many smart people not stop to just think like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
And then there was always a great irony to it that Facebook is this company. This is a conversation we have later, but I'll just say that Facebook sort of famously has slogans hung around the office. Most people know "Move fast and break things," but two of the slogans that they had up around this time and during these years that just seemed so perfectly contradictory was always assume positive intent amongst your coworkers. So, and then the other one was like bring your authentic self to work. So, I guess some people could say, oh, Palmer's mistake was that he made an anonymous donation that somehow became like something that was talked about in the workplace. Maybe he certainly didn't want it to be talked about in this way, but either way, of any company, Facebook should be seemingly the most sympathetic to bringing your politics to work, because a lot of people bring their progressive politics to work, and they explicitly say, bring your authentic self to work.
Oh, no, and Facebook, in my home state, that is the political, if you want to talk politics or political news, that's the platform that people use out here in South Dakota. It is very interesting. Facebook has some of the smartest people on the planet working for them. They have loads of people that worked in the Ivy League. They have lots of tech geniuses. These are the creme de la creme. These are like the very top. And it's amazing that people with that much general intelligence seem to just. I don't want to stretch this out, but really, you look at I love your book. The physical version is a little better for this. That you have copies of emails and internal forum posts by Facebook employees talking about their reaction to this, and it's kind of worrisome, because here's the end of the story. The end of the Facebook part of the story is that Mark Zuckerberg fires him. He does this delay thing. First, he has to sign this contract that says, I'm not really voting for Trump. I'm going to vote for Gary Johnson. And sends him on vacation, sends him on another vacation, and he's out.
And the reason I would say, I think it's really important to differentiate between facts and speculation, and the whole book is facts, but I would think a very educated guess for why Palmer wasn't fired then is because they had an upcoming court battle, and it's not surprising to me that the day that they rested their case in the court battle, before there was even a verdict, Palmer was told to clean out his office. So it seems very likely that that's why he was kept around and fired right after that.
Yeah, it is interesting to me, because we have this is one reason why your story, I think, is really beginning to gain traction, is because Facebook Silicon Valley in general, but Facebook especially, are claiming to be, great thought leaders, the arbiters of peace. They're going to make us better people and then connect us to each other. Zuckerberg, just as of last week, said straight out he wanted the federal government to regulate them. We're told that, things like, for example, shadow-banning Twitter, that doesn't happen. We're told that pages by ex-conservative or whatever aren't downvoted or blocked in some way. And it's hard to believe that in that company that had such a crazy reaction to a 20-something-year-old Trump supporter, and then Mark Zuckerberg, the Zuck bro himself, Zucker bro. I don't usually use that nickname. That's kind of a weird one. But the Zucker bro himself would deign to come down off his pedestal and fire him, where previously Zuckerberg and Palmer seemed to be getting along pretty well. And I mean, they had a business relationship, but it seemed like Zuckerberg did trust Palmer. And it's hard to believe that they're going to tell us, well, we totally don't dip our hands in politics. We totally don't push on the scales for one side of the political aisle or whatever. But at the same time, they do this to their tech whiz kid, who in part they had spent $3 billion acquiring. It's a phenomenal story. It really is.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you. I think I told it very well, but it really is just a phenomenal story and an important story. And I've had people say to me, Palmer, he's gone on to start a successful company, knock on wood. That didn't seem likely for a while. Based on the end of the book, things were not going so well for him. And he's very wealthy. So people have said, why are you trying to get me to feel bad for him? And I'm not. I don't care if you feel bad for him or not. The point is that Palmer's story is just a perfect proxy for so much of the stuff that's going on today in our digital landscape, from the online mobs to politics in the workplace now being part of your job performance. And so it's more about bringing these issues to light and considering, if this was any company, it probably wouldn't be that big of a deal. I mean, it would still be illegal, but I don't know that it would be that important that everyone reads. The fact that it's Facebook, this company that is one of the most powerful companies in the world and does play these games and basically just lie to us about shadow banning, about how they administer and govern on their platform, it's real. Palmer's situation provides a whole lot of insight into all of that. And one of the crazy things that I've found with my experience reporting on it was that, it's not just that Facebook lies to the press, lies to me. They lied to me a lot, and that's ultimately what led to them cutting off my access when I called them on it. But they also lied to their employees. A lot of people really liked Palmer, or at least were just curious about Palmer, and they asked what was going on, and they were told inaccurate things. They were told that Palmer was the one requesting vacation. They were told that Palmer would be coming back. All these things, and but at the end of the day, I guess that ended up working to my advantage because a lot of employees on both sides of the political spectrum were fed up and ended up getting documents and information to me because they wanted the truth to come out there and not the version that Facebook had been telling me, the public, or the employees. So they've really, I don't know why anyone at this point would trust Facebook about anything. And they are a data company first and foremost, so I think that should be an enormous problem that they've lost all trust.
Yeah, no, they've really been trying to burn their bridges. It is interesting. Facebook, of the social media platforms in particular, in my area of the country, Facebook that's it. Like, Twitter is kind of a thing some people have, but Facebook is where everybody goes. Maybe that's because Midwest values, or we have more old people. I don't know why that is, but Facebook is really big, and it's fascinating to think, and that's, I think, is part of the problem with all this. I think what your story does is that it accurately shines a light on what's going on instead of speculation, just assuming things. You're actually saying, no, here are the facts. Here's what's happening on the ground. It is very interesting. I can't thank you enough for talking. What has been the I first heard about your story. I read Console Wars back in the day and loved it. So I did not know you had a new book coming out. And I heard you on Glenn Beck. He's one of the conservative programs I check into time to time because he, say what you want about his politics, he does a pretty good job of finding obscure, different stories that tend to normally not get talked about. And your interview with him was really great, and it inspired me, and I felt like, you know what? I should ask Blake J. Harris to talk with me, and he was kind enough to agree. So how has been the reaction so far? Your book is now number 2 on Amazon in a couple of categories. I think it's video games and computers, and number 3 in another one. That wasn't how it initially happened for you, though. Like,
right? Yeah. So my first book, Console Wars, aided largely by the fact that it was being turned into a movie and now a TV show by Seth Rogen, did very well. So, I give a lot of credit there. There was no movie this time around, so I didn't expect that it would be as successful as Console Wars, but I did expect that most of the Console Wars didn't just sell well, it was very beloved by the gaming tech press. Like Polygon named me like a gaming personality of the year, the gaming personality of the year the book came out. I expected that not even necessarily that these people would like the book, but they would at least review the book or talk about the book. But it was almost nothing but crickets. There was, a couple of exceptions. I really appreciated Dean Takahashi at VentureBeat. He came out to one of my book readings and he wrote about that and also interviewed me. And then, Clay Routledge at Quillette, which is not a tech gaming site. And then the guys at IGN, they didn't read the book, but they had me on the show. But other than those few instances, nobody covered the book. Nobody talked about the book. I know they all have copies of the book because I either arranged for them to get it or I just know the publisher sent it. And that seems very sad to me. I would say it would seem odd, but not really, I guess, because Palmer is, a bad guy in their worldview for, I don't even understand what reasons at this point, because they should realize that they were wrong about what they said about him. And then the other thing, too, is that the book does point out a lot of errors that the media reported. The book was selling, shall we say, modestly. But in terms of, like, what I'm looking for, obviously I want it to be the #1 best-selling book ever, but I also am realistic. And to me, first and foremost, the most important reaction is the people themselves, because, I can write an awesome, fun book that you'll say is great, but if it's not based in reality, the only ones who will know if I did my job well are the people themselves who can say, yes, this is how it happened. So getting reactions from the people at Oculus and Facebook saying that this is spot on, that was, the most important reaction to me. It made me feel like I had spent my 3.5 years in a good way. And then I was really happy to see that of the people who actually were reading it, there was very high praise for it. Console Wars was it was definitely overwhelmingly positive, but there was a lot of it was like a 75 positive, 25% split. This seemed to be much more like 90-10 or higher. People really appreciated the journalistic effort. I made sure to be, as much as possible, I try to take myself out of the story, even more so than Console Wars. And then last week, everything changed when Glenn Beck had me on the show and learned about the story for the first time as I was telling it to him, and found it to be as absurd as and as important as I did. I guess that was the other thing. Like, of course, the past week, seeing the book shoot up from 33,000 to #2 of every book in Amazon is incredible and life-changing. And I told my wife, like, I'm probably never going to have a book that's ranked this high again. But there was also another component, like the emotional component of, for the past 2 years, I've been sitting on this information for most of it and then publishing it. And I felt like Zuckerberg's direct involvement here and everything that happened, like I felt like Chicken Little saying, like, the sky is falling. And then so many people in my circle would just be like, yeah, but it's like a Trump supporting sky, so who really cares?
Yep.
Like I just felt kind of crazy. Like, I actually said to my wife, like, am I just so close to the story that I think it's a bigger deal than it is? Because I usually think I'm very good at taking, trying to remain objective, and my whole career is storytelling, so I usually have a good sense of what makes for a good, whether there's something that's newsworthy in storytelling, important storytelling. But anyway, so it's been awesome for the past week, and so I guess that's a long-winded way of saying that not a lot of people were reading it prior to the past week, but I'm super happy with how the book came out and with the reaction of those that were reading it. And now it's wonderful that it's getting out to a larger audience, because I do think it's just a super important story. Like I told you, I think that I take pride in how I told it, but I'm much more interested in people just getting the story and knowing what happened than, giving me praise. Like it's not so much about me. Facebook is such a gigantic part of our daily lives. People should know what that company is really all about and how they treat employees and how they're going to likely govern things in virtual reality if they have their way.
Man, it is fascinating. I really love the book. So you say that you have material you weren't able to get in your current editions that you're planning to publish later.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely want to get it in for the paperback. Maybe I can write some articles in the meantime, or maybe it'll be in like another edition. Um, Nothing. There's certainly nothing that will change. There's nothing. There's no inaccuracies that are being corrected, and there's nothing in there that will change. I guess it's more evidence supporting some of these things that I just think I want to have documented, and like a good example is we've talked about how Palmer made this donation anonymously, but 4 months earlier he had no problem appearing at a Trump rally on TV.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So I would just want to square away, like, well, so what changed in between those 4 months? And what changed was that Peter Thiel came out as a Trump supporter, and people tried to get him fired from the Facebook board. So that's not a necessity to the story, but I think it just helps make it more comprehensive and makes things a little clearer. So just fun little stuff like that.
Okay, two last things. One, I appreciate your effort to be honest and ethical and try to be a good journalist. That you decided going the cheaper way that would have pleased your publisher and publish, when you had most of your story there. You decided to do the extra work and the time that was required to give it the full job. I am very impressed. As someone that has a background in journalism and loves good journalism, I am very impressed by that. I just wanted to thank you for that, for doing that. That is a high integrity kind of thing to do that we don't see too much these days. And secondly, I agree with you. My podcast and stuff, it's the Happy Warrior, because the hope was we could get the two sides to talk to each other more than they are. And hopefully it does get better, and that, like you said, in 10, 20 years, you'll have your grandkids or whatever on your knee and be like, I remember back in the day, we were all over each other's throats because of Facebook posts. And they're like, oh, no way, Grandpa.
I think, like, I'm an optimist at heart, so that's probably part of why I'm optimistic it will get better. But I also just think more and more, like, sort of the mob that happened to Palmer happens to people closer in our lives. And I know that I'm like a unique sample set, because I know Palmer. My friend Colin Moriarty had a similar situation for different reasons. But, like, I feel like the more people I talk to, they now know someone, a friend or a friend of a friend. And that's kind of what I hope the book shows, is like, by the time, Palmer will feel somewhat like a friend to the reader, and you'll sort of go through it, on the sidelines, and you'll see, like, when this stuff happens, think twice about jumping into the mob, or think, like, just try to be reasonable. Like, is this person an evil white supremacist? What is that based on? So I think, I don't know, I guess I have faith in our better angels and reasoning ability. So I'm hopeful, though I think it'll take a while to get to that place where I hope we end up.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Blake J. Harris. You have been excellent. I look forward to all your future projects and work. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to talk with me. This has been the highlight of my week. It really has cheered me up. I appreciate you being here.
All right. Thank you. And good piece in the Federalist.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very kind of you, man. All right.
Thank you for listening. The Happy Warrior Podcast, hosted by Peter Von Pischke, produced by Robert Mailing, a production of the Sioux Empire Podcast Network. Learn more at happy-warrior.net.
Of the SiouxEmpire.com.